So our next question comes from Matt C. Matt says, "Hey, Austin and Robert, I'm a longtime listener, but a first-time emailer. My wife and I have just shy of $1 million for a net worth in our late 30s. We contribute to our Roth IRA, 401k, our HSAs, and everything in between. We have 2 children, 9 and 11, and we want to set them up for generational wealth. What steps should I take now to ensure their success in the future?" They have $25,000 and $30,000 respectively in their 529 accounts. So like from a tactical perspective, what can you do now? You can really beef up those 529 accounts to be 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, $200,000 over the coming decade or so, because that's about how long they have before college. And after they turn 18, you take some of the money from the 529, you roll it over to the Roth IRA, invest it correctly, that'll be millions of dollars in retirement. It's just a wonderful strategy. Now, that's the tactical thing to do. But Robert, I want us to spend more time on maybe the emotional, psychological, and parenting advice. I was just listening to a podcast where they were talking about this, right? After people find themselves in an awesome situation like our friend Matt has here, where he is a millionaire in his 30s or 40s or 50s, and they finally have money, right? They do all the things right. Their biggest fear is their children turn into these Nepo baby, trust fund baby, silver spoon in their mouth, and they don't have any sort of work ethic, and they're just terrible adults, essentially, because all the money they came from. So the first couple things that I'd share is to practice contentment. I think the biggest piece of advice that I was given that really helped me understand money is to be super happy and grateful for what I have, knowing that there's always going to be someone out there that has more money, better looking, more income, more business, whatever it might be. There's always going to be someone out there that has more. And the sooner you realize that at 9 or 11 or 12, whatever the age is, right? But the sooner you realize that someone's always going to have more than you should just be happy with what you have is massive. And the second thing I'd encourage them to do is really get your children to understand you and your wife have money, they don't, right? I think it was Shaquille O'Neal that does this. He goes, "Yeah, my children don't have any money." I think his thing was on an interview, you need 3 degrees before you get to touch the cheese or something like that, right? Yep. So it's like, go put in the work in your college and post-grad or whatever it might be, and understand like what it means to build and educate and work and do all the right things before you have the opportunity to touch my money. It's not your money, it's my money, right? My wife and I have $1 million net worth. We get to choose where it goes. And if you want some of it, you have to prove to us that you can be good stewards of this money.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I love that takeaway because I just think that so much of it is tactical, but it's also mindset. If you can teach them work ethic, tenacity, and understanding your money versus their money early on, the better off you're going to be. I knew so many rich kids when I was growing up, and they just had no inspiration to try because their parents were wealthy and they assumed they were going to get that wealth in some point. And that's just a terrible outlook on life, because as we live longer and longer, you don't want to wait around your whole life for this honey pot that's coming from your parents when you can build it on your own. So I think it starts early, like you guys are doing. And tactically, the other thing to look at is, yes, you want to do the 529 accounts. Yes, you want to build them up and make sure they understand all this. I would maybe, because they're at that age coming up where you could put them on credit cards as signers on your credit cards. So when they turn 18, they have a good credit score built already. So that's a tactical thing you can do. But I think the number one most important tactical side is make sure that you have your holding company and your trusts built up as you build more wealth, because you're so early on in your late 30s. In the next 10, 20 years, as you build to 3 million, 5 million, 10 million in net worth, have all of the mechanisms in your setup to make sure that your properties, your money, none of it ever goes into probate, and then your kids are fighting to get it and having to spend all that time and money. That is one of the key takeaways of this whole situation, is making sure your structure is very sound. So then that way it is a complete pass through to your children. They get everything that you've worked for when you were to pass away, and make sure that all of that is done correctly. And that is just another tactical side of this wonderful situation.
Yeah. And additionally, have term life insurance, right? Get yourself $1 million or a $2 million policy. Obviously, you guys have done an awesome job building your net worth at such a young age, but maybe it's all come from you, or it's all come from your wife, or whatever's going on here, Matt. If something happens to you and your kids are in the, their teenage years, and this $1 million net worth now turns into half of that because you've got to figure out whatever's going on. Just having some term life insurance can really help with some of that. And something else I'd want to mention too is as they get older, right? Let's call it now early 20s. So you guys have millions of dollars at this point, and they're now at those ages where you should be having conversations of, this is what we have. This is how we should be thinking about this, right? Really want to encourage you to have those conversations about the trusts, about the wills, about all the things that Robert laid out while you're still alive. A mistake that I would argue a lot of people make is they surprise everybody at the end, right? They have all these specific instructions for an executor, and then they die. And now, to Robert's point, you go to this sort of meeting, and it is not at all what anyone thought was going to happen. And that's how money fights happen between family members and siblings and the in-laws. Like, have those conversations while you're alive. If you're going to offend someone, offend them while you're still alive. Have a backbone, and make sure your kids understand what they are walking themselves into, assuming they're able to check the boxes that you lay out for them.